Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at today's program, presented as part of the Wignall Museum's Home Edition, a series of curated artist talks, workshops, and discussions featuring artists and cultural workers. My name is Rebecca Trawick. I'm the curator and director of the Wignall Museum. The Wignall Museum is a teaching museum and interdisciplinary art space that introduces Chaffey College students, faculty, staff, and community members to innovative contemporary art objects and ideas. By fostering critical thinking, visual literacy, discourse, and empathy, the museum seeks to enhance the intellectual and cultural life of our community. We want to take a moment to recognize that we are situated on the Rancho Cucamonga campus of Chaffey College, which resides on the traditional and unceded lands of the Tongva people. We offer our respect to the elders, both past, present, and future.
And hello, my name is Roman Stollenwerk. I'm the assistant curator at the Wignall Museum. All programs in Home Edition will be recorded. Please visit us at our website at www.chaffey.edu/Wignall to access recordings. We'll post announcements to our email subscribers and social media when the videos are available on our site to access. Thank you.
And hello, everyone. My name is Andy Hadel. I'm the preparator at the museum and the studio tech for the Studio Arts Department here at Chaffey College. Briefly, I'll share a quick breakdown of today's program. In a moment, Rebecca will share a bio for our guest, Dulce Soledad Ibarra. Then Dulce will present for about a half an hour. Then the remaining time will be available for Q&A.
Thanks, Roman and Andy. We're pleased to introduce artist, designer, and curator Dulce Soledad Ibarra. As a practicing artist, Ibarra discusses issues of generational guilt and cultural identities in video, installation, and performance, and has been inviting the public to partake in the dialogue via workshops and participatory work. Looking through queer Chicanx perspective, the work is fueled by emotional labor, personal research, and analysis. Currently, Ibarra's work is centered around the Pinata Party Supply District of downtown Los Angeles, engaging in the means of sustaining as a community of businesses and as a place of cultural familiarities and commodities. Ibarra has exhibited, screened, and performed at venues across Southern California. Ibarra earned a BFA in sculpture from the Cal State University Long Beach and an MFA from the University of Southern California. She's also an alum of Chaffey College, so we're thrilled to have her with us today. Please see her full biography in the program guide on our website or visit Dulce's website directly. So please join me in welcoming Dulce Soledad Ibarra.
It's a real great pleasure to be asked to participate in these talks, considering I just have a long history with Chaffey as an institution and the Wignall Museum in particular. I think I met Rebecca and Roman about 10 years ago, working at the museum as a student staff member. And so that long-winded history and connection still thrives today. And so it's very honorable to be here. I think we'll start off with like some slides. And this is just an image of me. I just think that I think about the curiosity I've always felt as a child and different schemes of things. So I just wanted to give a little preview of me. But my work really emphasizes the ideas of identity and play and labor, and as well as thinking about community and as a whole and space sustaining. And through my work, it's just progressed, and also utilizing different types of materials or means of production to illustrate those topics. And the next slides, I have my undergrad work. I started off the slideshow with my work that I created at Chaffey. I utilized these. I was interested in the idea as a painter, but also thinking about painting in different ways and how that changes, and just kind of challenging what painting could be, but while also thinking about the fragility of materials. So I got my degree in sculpture, but I started off in the 2D mostly, and the 2D was just a vehicle for the 3D for me. These works were made with tissue paper instead of paint, and as well as incorporation of paper mache. I utilized the craft of papel picado and also coined the term papel pintado, which means painted paper, but also is another way of saying wallpaper. And thinking about the texturals of and iconography of Mexican culture, while also kind of thinking about like this adversity of thinking of illness. I have OCD, and at the time I didn't really realize that, but also thinking about the illness of a mind and how like that kind of also revolves around the illness of the body too. So this is just kind of like work that kind of started, and I think it still relates to what I'm doing now, particularly aesthetically. Yeah, so thinking about this, like how to combine both the 2D with the 3D, and also this application of a very fragile and impermanent material to kind of create layers and pictorial imagery. Yeah, and then we'll end with the last slide, which is just another example of that. And also utilizing different kind of objects that I picked up. So it was kind of my initiation of thinking of sculpture within painting, as I was like moving away from painting, but I still kind of move into painting a lot too. And then that was all at Chafee. So this was part of my time as a student under the Student Invitational course and exhibition, which was a really great art honors program that is still at Chafee now, and that I was just so honored to be part of. And yeah, so I wanted to start off the slides with that. Moving on to like, as I transferred into Cal State Long Beach, I kind of really honed into sculpture and material a lot more. And I went to high school in this quite mostly white, mostly upper middle class, mostly conservative town. And it was hard for me to I was grappling with the ideas of my own identity within these parameters of living situation. And for a long time, it took me a while to kind of take pride in the labor of my family, of my parents, of being part of this migrant story and carrying that with me. And so I ended up working with materials that my dad is a gardener, and so he would also keep a lot of his old tools and old older motors that didn't function anymore, but still had all of this history to it. It spoke in ways. And so these were kind of thinking about the narrative of building that pride in a lot of ways, and also considering the guilt that I have of like having my much older father continuously work under the hot sun, just so that we can have food on the table. So the next slide is kind of a more overview of the whole installation. This work is called Manos de Oro, Golden Hands. And the reason I was utilizing gold at that time was because both myself and my father have allergic reaction to gold jewelry. And that's something that for me became this metaphor of having this allergy to like living in an upper middle class, like luxury, like an allergy to luxury in general. And so like this story of like constantly working is something that I consider like this was his craft, and I'm just utilizing my craft to uplift that. The next slide, I have a video where, yeah, we could just watch it. It's quite brief. Yeah, so utilizing both this kind of romantic idea of his labor, but also the reality and the harshness of the machinery juxtaposed one another was kind of something that I was interested in. And as I continue to talk about migration and familial narratives, I went into speaking about my aunt, which is the next installation, who my late aunt who passed when I was 22, but raised me mostly as my parents both worked full time. And she was someone that was quite a collector of things, of just things, and it was a lot of it growing up was kind of overwhelming, and I didn't understand the idea of wanting to keep so much all the time. But when she passed, what happened was that we suddenly had so much attachment to everything that she ever owned. So while there was like this room in the house that was hers, we didn't want to let go of it. So we instead built another, my father and his friends built another room in their backyard that would house and continue to house a lot of the same um, collections that she had when she was alive. So what I did was take a lot of the furnishings, a lot of the objects, and created an installation that reminded me of this room that was painted yellow. And for whatever reason, yellow, um, for me represents warmth, but also it represented like an embrace. And when I think about embraces, I think about uh, her touch specifically. And so, taking a few look around the installation, I created kind of like this box that where people could actually interact with. People would go into it and uh, play with things. There was the piano that was always so enticing for people to want to interact with, but also the drawers, and there was also music boxes that I created for it. Um, and just thinking about dolls and ownership, and how she lived when she lived, she was an undocumented person, and how much trauma it was for her to grow up so poor but come to this nation finally, and to just own things was a very powerful thing, and something she never wanted to let go. And so it was interesting for someone to take ownership of all these objects in a space where she didn't feel she could own, a land that didn't see her belonging. So thinking about all of that, thinking about all the arrangements. This installation was called Recuerdos. Recuerdos is a term for memories, but it's also a term for these trinkets that you get at the end of the celebration. So in kind of the corner, I actually have one of the one of the shelves right there, right next to me. But like, there's these little trinkets for like baptisms, for weddings, for these takeaways. And so what I ended up creating, and from the piano, people could also take away these booklets, these zines that had text of journalings that I did during my time of thinking about things, and also kind of thinking about the iconography of that space. And when I think about, um, how much it is to own something, and how these are just artifacts, and she was just the director of the museum herself, so I kind of honored that in that way too. As I was kind of thinking about like placement a lot, I also started thinking about displacement too. So in this category of it, I used to, or I still do, maybe not right now, but I'm an educator, and I've always done workshops and instructions. And one of the workshops that I do frequently, or did frequently, not right now, is piñata workshops. And when I would introduce piñatas to communities, I would also talk about the history of the piñatas. And the history of piñatas is that they were introduced by the Spanish when they were a game that was created for this initiation of conversion. And the original piñata was made with 7 points, like a star. And those 7 points represented 7 deadly sins. And when you would play this game with this paper craft that was created, paper ceramic craft that was created, the object was to break it, and to break the piñata would mean for you to break away from your sins, and then eventually get the gifts that reap from you, being a good Christian, a good Catholic. So this was a game for Indigenous folks, and this was a tool of genocide and displacement in Mexico and the Americas of all sorts. So I talked about that within this work too, where instead of using the traditional piñatas, we know them to be shaped as well. So I started mapping out different areas of Boyle Heights. This was a home that I currently live in Boyle Heights now too. And this was a home that had an eviction notice on it, placed on one of the doors. And I did 3 different types of piñatas, 3 different structures. It was that apartment complex, one of a gallery that was famously disfaced with "fuck white" art written across it, and also this other vacant space that was, that had gallery owner interest, which a lot of the folks of Boyle Heights were protesting about. And so, coming from a low income background, I considered how my place now, as I'm moving into and have been establishing myself within the arts, working within the arts, and seeing the tension and how it's created between the two, particularly in Los Angeles. But we also kind of saw something like that, in the early 90s for New York. But like these, highly populated spaces, and how everyone wants to live here, and how art becomes, like the piñata, a tool of displacement. And just thinking about the awareness of how to consider that, how we consider ourselves masters of our tools, but also thinking about like how we can actually be more aware of how we use our tools and where our tools are being used. So these piñatas became ballot boxes that people placed their answers to these questions. I had 3 different questions for the 3 different piñatas. And, it wasn't about creating solutions, but just thinking about answers, just thinking about different ways we can and also just creating opinions and awareness. So after all was done, we broke the piñatas. So this was another step of me doing participatory work as well. And when the piñatas were broken, if you go to the next slide, we'd gather around and we'd read all of the notes and all the answers that were provided from those questions. And it wasn't about us having a long-winded conversation. It was more about us reading those responses and meditating on those answers. And they were all different. So it wasn't like trying to create an argument, but just so much like, how are we aware of everything? Yeah, so that was kind of another use, kind of going back to my chafy days too, like of the paper mache and detailing of tissue paper. And then my graduate work, as I moved on from Cal State Long Beach, started with more performances. Something I did in my undergrad work, but I didn't utilize as much. I, was mostly thinking about grief in these moments. This was on the anniversary of my aunt's death. So again, going back to that initial installation, and thinking about the idea of grief and how it's repetitive and how it's ever long and how it's sometimes inexplainable. What I set up was myself. I love to do karaoke, and my aunt was a singer too. And so what I did was I started off by singing Selina's Como la Flor. And then what I did was like for the audio recording that I had of this like karaoke kind of staging, I ended up looping the part where Selena, or the song goes, "Ay, como me duele." And I did that for 3 hours, and I sang that and cried for 3 hours in kind of grief. And so some participants joined me. Most people were just kind of stayed away from it, and it's part of this like larger performance event. And so it was kind of, it was easy for me to cry that long and cry and just sing and cry for that period of time. But I think that it was also like the anxiety of being vulnerable in front of people as well. My next piece for this was also talking about the border in particular. So we can play it. So that work was about grief too. If you could hear it, there was like some singing in the background, and that was just a recording that I had of my late cousin, who was deported, and then because he got ill and couldn't work anymore, and then eventually died on the other side. And I was the person to tell his family about like his children that I grew up with, about his death, and thinking about grief in the border and how a lot of us have been unable to visit the graves of the people that we lost, and how there's this constant conflict within it is what I was meditating on. Originally, when I was recording this, I was just documenting myself picking up border dirt. And I didn't really know what to do with the material. And then I kind of just realized that it was because I went there frequently, and this was like within the San Diego area. This is right next to the shipping parts, basically the port, where goods come in through. So it's a lot of trucks. And yeah, I would just go there often and collect dirt because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I wanted to work with it. And what it ended up being was the action of digging and the action of even grabbing the dirt became the work itself. I did try doing a lot of trial errors. I just didn't like anything I made out of it. It didn't feel as soothing as much as like, the action of it all. So it became kind of more performance than anything else. And then I was thinking about these ideas of language while I was in grad school as well, and how it became these the way I learned Spanish was through my parents and through telenovelas, and I considered that a lot while I was in Spanish television in general is how I learned Spanish. And so I became really interested in that while also incorporating these ideas of like, where else do I see the combination of both my queer identity and my Spanish speaking background, my Latinx background. And that was at these queer nightlives, specifically like this was at New Jalisco, which has a whole bunch of drag performances. And if we go to the next slide, we can kind of get a preview of the work.
La escritora norteamericana Susan Sontag dijo: no está mal ser bella, lo que está mal es la obligación de serlo. Un cordial saludo y bienvenidos a Caso Cerrado.
Yeah, so the song is like from a telenovela theme song, and obviously I'm using clips from telenovelas too, and I just use, so I do a lot of writing as well, and so I just use kind of these texts that had me thinking about my upbringing of like being a Spanish speaker and then learning how to lose the language as I entered school, and also thinking about how I'm trying to still engage with that as I'm growing as an adult at the same time, but also as I'm finding other like ways of my identity as well. So I kind of just tackled on that as well. And then the next slide, I have I was going to show a video for this one too, because what I ended up doing was doing these auditions. It's like it was a video, and then a later, after the video was over, was a performance. So it had two parts to it. And the video part was me holding auditions for this telenovela that I had created and asking different performers, actors, to participate that also came from Spanish speaking backgrounds or Latinx backgrounds, and them reading this fully Spanish script. Some of the folks struggled with that. Some of them were much better at reading, and some of them were great actors but could not read Spanish quite well. But the whole point of the script was thinking about this this high volume of loss, and also burden of language, as well as you think about someone that, like myself, who would go to my mother's doctor's appointments just so I can translate things, or people that are like that go to med school, and like myself again, who like feel completely like amount of discomfort of even speaking the language when I'm there. So it's like ties both of them together. And so viewing telenovelas as these like high drama settings, I also kind of considered like what I learned from telenovelas, and all of them were just like words of insults. And so what I ended up doing was having these words of insults scrolled. I would scream them, and then my partner performer would slap me across the face as I was screaming them. So the whole idea of like this cachetada was like a slap to the mouth, to the face, and to the loss of language, and to also like this burden of language as well. So it was something I was playing with at the time. So this closet, again, thinking about queer identity, this is a collaborative project I did with an artist friend, Christine Hudson. And what we were kind of fixated on is this idea of the closet, and this kind of notion of coming out of it, but also creating this transparency of the closet. And I think we took a lot of text from Eve Sedgwick's Invisibility of the Closet, and thinking about how it's subverted in a lot of ways, but how can we make a closet, a translucent closet, first of all, that was hard work, and then also creating ways for it to be interactive and actually hold space for folks. So what this became was a clothing collection, and in the collection, first of all, people could take clothes if they wanted to, but they're also available to donate clothes. And so this became like a project where people would come in and give clothes. And what we did with those clothes was eventually give it to LGBTQ youth that were facing homelessness or just struggling for income. So this became kind of like another way for us to have participants be included in a piece. Yeah, and then we go to the next slide. I think there's another slide, right? Yes. Yeah, so obviously I talk a lot about identity in general, and I was starting to feel like a little bit of animosity towards the fact that, you know, I had these expectations about me as an artist, as a Chicanx, Latinx artist, that were placed upon me. And sometimes yes, I did work around it, but I also felt like I was only expected to do work about it. But I wanted to do it in a way that, you know, felt like it was my identity in particular. So having that conflict, and also thinking about how I don't want to be a gatekeeper for this identity, and I don't want to be the only speaker for this identity. But I also realized that like when folks were pushing me to do work like that, it became kind of this like I felt like I was exploiting my identity more than anything else. So there was a conflict with it, and I was just looking at materials of things that can carry so much. And so I started making these small gestures with these bolsas, which you know, are reusable and durable, and hold groceries or what have you, and thinking about myself as that as well. Um, so yeah, and so I really loved the material in general, but they all the bolsas that I was making at that time stood at my height, and had the potential for me to be inside of them as well. So they were designed for me. You know, so it was just about manipulating them to be at my height. That actually, with the use of materials, brings me to kind of like the next projects that the project that I'm currently super focused on, which is Ninth to Olympic. It was part of my thesis, but it's something that is beyond my thesis as I graduated. But like when I got those bags, I went to the Pinata district, and this was kind of, I loved going there. And similarly to, like, you know, the border project, I I felt like like as I was grabbing material, I was thinking about how the material is just second to like the space of it all and the action of being there. And so I started to really become friends and familiar with the area and the folks that were working there. And suddenly I had just this large interest in them, and also like thinking about the area that we currently we occupy in that area is like is a place that has ownership, but also the ownership is impermanent. And I think about like how LA changes so fast, and how you know, displacement happens, but also like how much I want to be so protective of spaces like this, and especially honor things as like someone that's been working at art institutions for nearly 10 years now, and how you know, I think about how some of those institutions I worked with didn't really focus on the community around them, and you know, for them it wasn't really, they weren't speaking to the surrounding community as much as they were like, we're trying to get, you know, the art community here. But you know, a lot of the spaces that I also worked at were really good about being community based. And so thinking about, you know, larger institutions that, you know, don't really focus in on community or are just barely starting to engage with the community. Um, I also was trying to give notice of like how museums aren't the only cultural meccas. They aren't the only places that house culture. There's culture before them and there's culture after them. And it's just about making sure that we protect these spaces as much as we protect museums and art institutions. So, so to me, like the Piñata district was an art institution. It was a space that represented so much to me, where I can see makers, and I could see crafts, and I could see all this iconography that so much belonged to my history and my family, but also to everyone around that was walking around. So I have like another just image of that. I failed attempt at trying to do a panoramic of like the other side of the street, which is a little lonelier, but like still like spirited in a lot of ways. And you know, there's trying to create, my whole point of like wanting to be there was trying to sustain these businesses, trying to sustain this culture, these arts that were happening there. I still utilized bolsas de mercado, these market bags, but I reshaped them to kind of think of people inside of them more formally. And so what I thought about was clothing, and this idea of uniforms, and this idea of laborers, and how I would love to give them the opportunity to um, to use these things or understand these things. And so yeah, I started making these uniforms out of the material that I once was so utilizing for something else. Also going back to painting again, and utilizing the idea of what painting is, or challenging what it could be, and a lot of these works were made within conversations that I was having with the folks there. So this one's particularly, it's called Creciendo, and it's Creciendo para Yolanda. So it was a conversation I had with Yolanda, who was part of La Mexicanita, and how I had her buy me vases, or choose the vase that I was buying, but also have conversations with her. She also was from the same state as my parents from Mexico, and also she just talked to me about her daughter, and all these things. So it was just about creating these conversations and my responses to those conversations. Then again, like this idea of uniform, this one was for me because I love wearing overalls. And so I was just thinking about how that is my uniform. It's part of my daily, but also and these were all things that could fit a person, particularly me, because I'm the only person that I can size. I'm not really a textile maker or a clothing maker. These are all hand stitched too. So there's also the fragility of that too. But yeah, so I was using my own body as this as a model for these works. During my time in grad school, which was, I just graduated this past May, it was during the pandemic, and that halted everything that I was working on. And all the stores that were bright and vibrant and colorful and loud and really great were closed down. And I didn't know what to do. This was on April 1st. I had just returned from this housing protest. And so, and I had worked with housing rights communities as well before. And so, I thought about how the Pinata district is a district of hustlers, of people that are just trying to survive, and it's a daily struggle to survive, and how this impacted them more than maybe a lot of other folks, because it was always on their mind anyways before the pandemic. So thinking about how migrant communities choose to adapt and survive was something that I was struggling to kind of see within the community, but within a few months I did. It was a month and a half, and what they ended up doing was housing essential products so that they can be seen as this quote unquote essential business. So all of them eventually started to open up, and it was just kind of thinking fast, and because they had no other choice but to be open and to continue. But what happened was they lost a lot of business, and prior, I didn't want to incorporate their labor into the work that I was doing because they were already doing labor on the daily. So, my efforts were just me to have these conversations, and I would do the labor of creating. But suddenly I saw this opportunity of they didn't have as much business, and I'm sure that they were struggling to make ends meet. So I worked with a few folks, and I started designing ideas of piñatas. Another thing that I noticed was that a lot of them didn't have digital presence. They didn't have online stores. Some of them didn't even have a Facebook, so so it was just kind of a struggle for them to try to work within the online platform when it wasn't something they ever thought about. A lot of these spaces were also cash only, so it's just how does that work? They just started adapting to it, and part of that adaptation was me promoting all of them as well. And so it wasn't just the piñatas or the party supply stores, but also the street vendors that I was interested in as well. And so if we go to the next slide, that's when I get to the illustration that I was making. Sobrevivientes is the first text that I thought about, or the word that I thought about when I considered this district. And sobrevivientes means survivors in Spanish. And I just kind of did this doodle, and I was like, I think this is something that I want to actually happen. I worked with one of the stores, name is Carusel Party Supplies. And that's Lino with his fist up, mask on, and right in the middle. And he's like the head piñata maker there, piñatero. And yeah, so as you can kind of see, the outside is very important, just as important as the inside for these folks. So you can kind of see that there's a wall of masks that they've created. All of the stuff right in the front is all like cleaning supplies, sanitation things, all kinds of just like, or even like tissue paper and like, I mean, like tissues, and toilet paper, like everything that everyone kind of needed during this time. So again, they shift gears, but still they're still trying to promote, parties and supplies for them. But yeah, this is them becoming quite proud. They Lino added the coronavirus piñatas on the ends of each of those. But so it was important for me to kind of also create these opportunities for them. But what also ended up happening was they ended up having a sense of pride of the work that they made. This isn't something that they ever been commissioned to do. It's just usually characters or, numbers for people's ages, for children's ages. So, this was a new thing for them. And I ended up doing this. My thesis ended up being a direct, this is like the thesis installation, but the whole idea came through a direct response to the impact of what the pandemic created, and the opportunity that I created through that. And that was to continue this engagement, but also initiate these collaborative efforts. And so this was the display that I had. And of course, no one could actually enter the gallery. So this display was specifically for the windows, a drawing for the window, dressed for the window. So I had the word sobrevivientes, and I worked that one, and juntos were words that I worked with, I commissioned Carusel Party Supply for that. Con ganas, and you can't see it, but there's the word pasale, were commissioned for, or were done by Kenya's Party Supply. And then Entrale, which is on the other side, that one was done by this really small store, La Mexicanita, which is one of my favorite stores there, just because I'm like closely tied to them. But all of them, like, I didn't know Kenya as much, but I ended up being really good friends. She's very funny. She's so like I ended up being really good friends with all these folks there. And it was just this idea of creating connectivity, but also this opportunity for them to kind of see themselves as makers, just as I see them as well. My thesis and my project, as it continues, the whole point of it was to create business for these spaces so that I can be part of the way that they sustained. Like, I go there and I shop there, but I can't be the only one. And I would like to continue to influence folks for these pieces, like continue to engage and to create opportunities for them. Yeah, so the plan initially was to actually have an exhibition kind of out there, but that was again pushed. but it's something that I continuously think about, and like how I can have participation of the folks there or collaboration. And as I continue with my Instagram page that I created for the district, which a lot of them follow me on, um, uh, and also other party supply stores that aren't even in that area sort of follow me on there too. So it's this connectivity that's constantly happening. We've created a space online as well as like without or like aside from the space that's created on the street. And hopefully to some points I will put this project into fruition um, at a more safer time, but like continuously thinking of ways of how to collaborate with these folks. Yeah, I think I'll end there. Yeah, that's the last slide anyways.
Thank you, Dulce. It's a real joy to learn about your process,
Yeah.
more about your practice. So thank you so much. So we would ask all of you to ask questions. If you would prefer to not show yourself or not speak, you can include your question in the chat and Andy and I will ask them. Or you can unmute yourself and speak, whatever you prefer. But maybe I'll kick it off with a couple questions.
Yes.
So it's interesting that so many of the materials that you use, whether, we're talking about pinatas or mercado bag garments or, all these different material choices that you're making are often traditionally woven or manufactured by female laborers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to ask if that's intentional. And then sort of a part two is, do you consider yourself a feminist artist?
Yeah, I mean, feminism is, come on, you know that. But yeah, I think about, I think about myself as an activist in general for all kinds of human rights, and thinking about, my grandfather was someone that on my maternal side was part of the Bracero project. When he came over to the States just to do farm work, and he died quite young due to all the pesticides he was exposed to. And that's something like labor rights is something that I constantly and my whole family is at the forefront of. My brother is a secretary for his union in particular. And so like it's encompassed like my whole family's lifestyle, thinking about that, thinking about lower income, thinking about women laborers, migrants in general, just any kind of where we see kind of the injustice, this disenfranchisement of certain folks is usually where I find my narratives to be surrounding anyways. But yes, constant use of activism in my work in some sort of way, whether it be through like just creating dialogue or actually creating action. I see your other question too, about the commission. So the question is, did I commission multiple piñata vendors as a way of supporting? Yes, that's exactly what I did. Some of them don't make piñata, some of them are imported, and which is also really nice because it's this constant conversation with the border that they have, right? So it's like they're made from Mexico and they bring them over here. So it was fun. It was, one thing was like trying to find the folks that were actually making them live and that could actually want or interested in making them or have the time or the means to make them. That means meaning like even space, because some of the stores are smaller than others. So also thinking about that as well. Yeah, but even so, like even if I'm not commissioning piñatas, I will go to like as many stores, as many people as possible. And when at the time where things were a little safer and I would bring folks there, I would do kind of like these walks with people. And I would always ask them to bring cash with them. And so like we'd walk around and we'd go into different stores. And even when we ate, I didn't have people choose the same street vendors to buy food from. So it'd be like we disperse our monies to as many people as we possibly could. Yeah.
That's amazing. Great. So I'm realizing we are almost
Oh my God.
4:00. Last call for a question from participants. Oh, Madeline.
Hi guys. Hi everyone. I don't have
Hi,
any
Maddie.
questions, but I just wanted to say congratulations
Oh,
on
thank you.
everything, graduating, but continuing your amazing work. And I had to chime in and hear what's going on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing all that you create in the future.
Oh,
So-
Maddie. So
so
nice.
good to see
I
you.
know. Hope you're well. Thank you. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
We'll be in touch.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
So
Yeah.
maybe this would be a quick wrap-up question. Evelyn
Yeah.
asks, how do you keep your motivation to continue creating? And I would also tack on, particularly during this pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Motivation is not something that everyone has right now. But and I have my days where I don't really want to do anything. But I think that everything has been a continuous struggle. And as I kind of, even through this time, like we've seen so many mutual aid opportunities and crowdfunding opportunities where the community just helps itself, like when our government is kind of low on helping us. So that's probably the most motivating thing that I have, is that like other folks that I see continuously doing these things as well. And this is my particular project, but it's also not the only place that I stay focused in. But those kinds of moments keep me motivated to continue to do the work. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, huge thanks to you, Dulce. Thanks
Yeah,
for your
thank you.
generosity and time today. And I want to thank all of you for being here and joining us this afternoon and carving out some time in your day. We appreciate you. Roman is going to put a link to a very quick survey we'd ask all of you to complete. Take a moment to do so. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could. And also, just to reiterate what Roman said earlier, that archived episodes will be included on our website as soon as they're available. So thanks again, everyone, and take good care.
Thank you.